He walked in wearing a plain shirt and old sneakers, just another man stepping into a luxury car dealership. The staff laughed behind his back. One even offered him the used car catalog before he could speak. They didn't know he was the new owner, and they had just failed his silent test. What followed wasn't revenge. It was a quiet, powerful reckoning that would flip their world upside down. This isn't just a story about one man, it's a mirror for every place where appearance is mistaken for worth. Stay with us, because what happens next will change how you see respect, leadership, and humanity forever. The Arizona sun blazed like a silent predator, hovering mercilessly over the glimmering streets of Scottsdale, as if trying to melt every illusion of civility beneath it. From a distance, Sterling Motors stood like a palace of opulence, a towering fortress of glass chrome and prestige, where the air reeked of power and polished engines. Behind its pristine windows, employees moved like choreographed dancers among vehicles that cost more than some homes each, with a fixed smile and polished shoes. But on that sweltering afternoon, something different rolled into the lot. Not a Lamborghini or Rolls-Royce, but a faded black SUV whose engine sighed when it stopped, not roared. The driver's side door creaked open slowly, and out stepped a man who didn't look like he belonged there, not by their standards at least. His name was Marcus Morgan, black, mid-40s, athletic build, calm presence. Wore an old gray t-shirt that had lost its shaped jeans, frayed slightly at the cuffs, and black sneakers that had long traded their showroom shine for the scars of movement and memory. A canvas bag rested against his hip, casual and practical, not flashy. His wrist bore no Rolex. No designer sunglasses framed his face. Only a quiet, unreadable look in his deep-set eyes betrayed the truth he had come not to buy, but to test. Because 3 weeks ago, Marcus had purchased Sterling Motors through an investment firm under his holding company, Apex Equity Group. No one knew yet. Not the managers, not the staff. And today was not the day for headlines. Today he wanted to see if the people behind the glass walls judged a person by their character or their shoes. The gravel beneath his sneakers crunched as he stepped away from the SUV, shielding his eyes from the sun, to take in the dealership's towering glass doors. He stood there for a moment, letting the heat settle on his skin. It wasn't the heat he was focused on, it was the chill he expected to feel once inside. With a quiet breath, he started walking. As he approached, he caught sight of 3 employees through the glass, 2 men and a woman leaning casually at the reception counter, laughing. Their laughter softened as his silhouette approached. When he opened the door, cool air burst from the vent above, but it didn't wash away the temperature of their glances. It hit him immediately, not in volume, but in weight. Their conversation halted mid-sentence, eyes flicking to his shoes, then up to the faded neckline of his shirt to the canvas bag. It was the kind of glance that didn't shout anything, just whispered assumptions. Assumptions they thought were safe behind smiles. "New customer," the blonde at the desk asked quietly, nudging her colleague with a smirk. "Probably just here for the AC." Marcus didn't respond. He didn't even pause. He walked with the quiet grace of someone who'd spent his life walking into rooms that weren't built for him, who'd learned how to be invisible and watch everything. As he moved down the row of luxury vehicles, the air smelled of new leather, industrial polish, and carefully selected cologne. But underneath it, Marcus sensed something else. He wasn't offended by the lack of a greeting. He expected it. That's why he wore what he wore. That's why he didn't announce his arrival with paperwork or power. His eyes moved from car to car, but he wasn't just inspecting vehicles. He was inspecting people. How long until someone approached him? Would anyone offer a brochure? Would they make eye contact that said customer instead of stranger? The answer came as he reached the 3rd row. None. Not one of them moved from behind their marble counter. Instead, he heard soft murmurs behind his back. "Check out those shoes," one male voice said with a chuckle. "Dude probably wants to take selfies with the cars." Marcus allowed himself the smallest smile. He wasn't here to get angry. He was here to see the disease before prescribing the cure, and so far the symptoms were clear. At the far end of the showroom, a dark coupe caught his eye, sleek, impossibly curved, and bathed in soft lighting, like a centerpiece in a museum. Marcus drifted toward it, his fingers sliding across the side mirror with the reverence of someone who understood engineering, not envy. It was then he heard them, the deliberate clicks of high heels. Steady, forceful, coming closer. He didn't turn around. Not yet. He knew exactly who it was. Every empire had a gatekeeper. Susan Miller, showroom manager for over 7 years, known for her sharp instincts and protective standards, as the acquisition file had phrased it. She had never met Marcus, but she had just found a reason to block him. The clicks stopped. A clipboard landed against her side like a weapon. "Can I help you with something, sir?" Her voice was tightrope polite. "This area is reserved for premium display models." She let that last word hang. Premium. Marcus slowly turned to her, calm, still wearing that quiet smile. "I was admiring the design," he said. "Very clean lines." Susan's gaze swept him from head to toe. She didn't hide it. "Of course," she said, brushing imaginary lint from her blazer. "But I should mention all purchases here are custom order only. We typically ask clients to schedule visits and pre-verify financials. It saves everyone time." She smiled. Marcus returned it. "That's reasonable," he said. "Efficiency is important." But Susan's expression didn't change. She wasn't looking for a conversation. She was looking for an exit cue. Behind her, Brandon watched the interaction with thinly veiled amusement, whispering to Chloe. "This is about to get awkward." Marcus stepped a bit closer to the coupe. "Is it okay if I take a closer look?" Susan's eyes hardened. "I'm afraid that model is limited access. Clients must be accompanied by staff. Policy." Her tone had slipped, less polite, more firm. A gentle push toward the door. Marcus nodded, stepping back. "Understood. I wouldn't want to break any rules." Susan gave a clipped nod, ready to turn away. But then Marcus added softly, "I imagine someone here has the authority to grant exceptions, though, yes." That question made her pause. And in that pause, Marcus saw it, the flicker of annoyance, the wall. The assumption that someone dressed like him must be difficult, entitled, or worse, delusional. "I'm the manager here," she said finally, posture stiff. "If you'd like to schedule a formal appointment, we can certainly." Marcus cut in polite but firm. "Actually, I'd prefer to speak with the owner." Susan's eyebrow arched like a guillotine. "The owner isn't available." "That's okay," Marcus said. "I'll call them directly." He reached into his bag, pulled out his old phone, and began dialing. And in that moment, everything shifted. Silence fell over the entire showroom. Every whisper ceased. Every eye turned. Because it wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Not with desperation, but with certainty. The kind of certainty that didn't come from bluffing. Susan's breath hitched just slightly. Her grip on the clipboard tightened. The others watched, eyes darting from Marcus to Susan, like they were bracing for a storm they hadn't seen coming. And in that stillness, Marcus raised the phone to his ear. "Hey, Alex," he said, casually voice, carrying just enough. "Yeah, I'm at the Scottsdale location. There's a bit of a customer service issue, mind stopping by." He didn't need to say anything more. The trap had already been sprung, the test had begun, and the dealership had failed spectacularly. The silence that followed Marcus's phone call was not the kind of silence that settled peacefully. It was the suffocating kind, the kind that coiled itself around every word left unsaid, every smirk that had just died, every assumption suddenly clinging to the walls like fog on glass. Susan Miller didn't speak immediately. She was still processing what she had just heard. Her mind, usually sharp, organized, and trained to categorize customers within seconds, had begun to stutter. Who exactly had this man just called? Why did he speak with that tone of ownership, not request? Why did her stomach tighten with the kind of unease that only came when one's carefully managed illusion of control began to slip? Marcus didn't look at her anymore. He simply put his phone away, adjusted the strap of his canvas bag, and returned his calm gaze to the coupe on display, as if the scene had already moved on. His demeanor didn't shift to arrogance or revenge. If anything, it remained, unsettlingly neutral, and that more than anything unnerved Susan. It wasn't bravado. It was knowledge. Across the room, Chloe had stopped pretending to organize paperwork. Her mouth was slightly open, eyebrows drawn tight. Tyler's posture had changed from amused relaxation to nervous alertness, his hand frozen halfway toward a coffee mug. Even Brandon, who seconds ago had laughed about this guy taking selfies, was now standing a little stiffer, watching Marcus like one watches someone who might explode or ascend. The moment stretched, each second feeling heavier than the last. Then came the sound that sliced through the air like a verdict, the soft whoosh of the front doors sliding open. Everyone turned. Framed by the light pouring in from the lot outside stood Alex Thompson, tall, composed, clad in a tailored navy suit. He wasn't just regional management. He was the bridge between ownership and operation, the man who answered only to the very top. Alex's eyes scanned the room for less than a second before locking on Marcus. And then he smiled. Not politely, not professionally, but warmly as one greets someone of equal standing. "Mr. Morgan," he said, striding across the floor with deliberate calm, "my apologies for the delay. Traffic on the freeway was brutal." Marcus extended a hand, meeting the gesture with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove. Their handshake was firm, quick, and loaded with implications that every person in that room understood. Susan's jaw clenched slightly. Chloe audibly gasped. Brandon looked like he had just seen his future evaporate in the shape of that handshake. "I appreciate you coming," Marcus replied. "Didn't want to escalate anything without giving your team a chance to show me their best." That one-sentence calm measured was a blade wrapped in silk. It didn't need to be loud to be lethal. Alex turned eyes sweeping the staff. His expression was unreadable. Was there an issue, he asked flatly? Susan stepped forward automatically, her professional instincts on autopilot, but her voice betrayed her. I wasn't aware." She started, then faltered. She could feel every pair of eyes pressing into her. "I didn't know who he was." Marcus turned his gaze to her, now steady, unblinking, not cruel, but piercing. "That's precisely the problem," he said quietly. "You didn't know who I was, so you decided what I couldn't be." The words hung there, no shouting, no anger, just truth so clean, so undeniable that it struck deeper than any outburst could have. Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her heels, retreating half a step toward the reception desk. Brandon lowered his head, muttering something under his breath. Tyler swallowed hard, and Susan could no longer rely on her blazer or clipboard to shield her. She had been stripped bare in front of her team, her authority reduced to ashes, not by power games, but by the weight of her own assumptions. Alex's voice interrupted the tension, cool and direct. "I think we need to gather the team." There was no debate, no pushback. One by one, they filed into the conference room, those who had snickered, who had judged, who had stood by silently. Marcus followed steps calm, but each one echoing like a drumbeat in Susan's ears. She stayed back for a moment, her fingers gripping the clipboard tighter than ever, her breath shallow. Then she walked, slowly, into the room where her reality was about to be rewritten. The glass door clicked shut behind her, and for the first time in years, Susan Miller realized she wasn't the one conducting the meeting. She was the one being called to account. The conference room, typically a place of sterile presentations and overused sales cliches, now crackled with a far more volatile energy, raw, unfiltered tension. The usual posters promoting customer excellence and integrity in sales hung on the walls like silent judges bearing witness to the contradiction unraveling beneath them. As the last staff member shuffled in the air, grew heavy, not with heat, but with reckoning. No one sat the way they usually did. The once boisterous Brandon now hunched into himself, staring at the laminated tabletop like it held the answer to his survival. Chloe twisted a tissue in her lap, eyes red, but still darting sideways, avoiding Marcus's gaze. Tyler sat near the wall, his expression frozen in a neutral grimace, fingers tapping nervously beneath the table. And Susan Miller, once queen of this kingdom, was no longer seated at the head. She sat 2 seats to the left, her clipboard placed limply in front of her like a defanged weapon. Across the table, Marcus Morgan sat, quietly, hands folded, eyes calm yet unrelenting. The room didn't fear him because of who he was. It feared him because of what he represented, a mirror, and no one in that room was ready to look into it. Alex stood to the side, not speaking. Not yet. He knew this wasn't his moment. This was Marcus's reckoning to deliver. And Marcus didn't rush. His silence was louder than reprimands, more suffocating than yelling. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, but every syllable landed with unmistakable gravity. "I came here today, wearing what I wore," he began, "because I wanted to know who you really are when no one is watching, when no cameras are rolling, when the person in front of you doesn't check the boxes you expect for a real customer." No one blinked. He continued, gaze moving slowly from one face to the next. "And what I saw," he said, pausing, "was a showroom that sells luxury, but offers no dignity." Susan flinched. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table. Brandon's jaw twitched. Chloe pressed her lips together, and Tyler looked down at his lap. Marcus leaned slightly forward. "I watched you all as you judged someone who didn't look like he belonged, not based on how he spoke, not based on what he asked, but based on a cotton t-shirt and old sneakers. He turned his gaze directly towards Susan, and worse, that judgment wasn't neutral. It was weaponized, used to exclude, to contain, to redirect, without ever once asking who I was. Susan opened her mouth, but no words came. Marcus didn't need her to speak. "This isn't just about me," he continued. "This is about what would have happened if I were a single mom with 2 kids in tow. A disabled veteran in street clothes. A young man who saved for years and walked in nervous, hoping to be taken seriously." His voice didn't rise, but it cut sharper now. They would have walked out of here thinking something was wrong with them. But the truth is, what's wrong is in this room. The weight of his words settled into the floor like anchors. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, suddenly too bright, too clinical for what was unfolding. Alex finally stepped forward, offering Marcus a respectful nod before addressing the group. "I want everyone here to understand something very clearly," he said. "This is Marcus Morgan. He is the new owner of Sterling Motors. Not a partner, not an investor, not a temporary figurehead. He owns this dealership, and your behavior today wasn't just unprofessional, it was in violation of the very core values we claim to stand on." Brandon's head dropped fully now. Chloe let out a breath like she'd been holding it for hours. Tyler wiped his palms on his pants. And Susan. Susan stared straight ahead, pale, frozen, her clipboard untouched. Marcus leaned back slightly, letting the weight of Alex's words hover. Then he spoke again, more quietly. "The saddest part is I wasn't surprised. That broke something in Susan." Her breath hitched, and for the first time her voice cracked as she whispered, "I didn't know. I didn't mean—" Marcus turned to her calmly. "That's the point, Susan. You didn't try to know. You didn't think it was possible for someone who looked like me, dressed like me, to own this place. That's the root of it. Not malice, assumption." Susan looked down, her once impenetrable professionalism now in ruins. The woman who once ruled the showroom with polished confidence now looked human, flawed, and quietly devastated. Marcus folded his hands again, speaking not just to her now, but to everyone. "So here's what's going to happen next," he said. "You will all receive mandatory training, not just on procedures, but on bias, on presence, on empathy. And anyone who refuses that journey won't have a place here." He paused. "Let it settle. Then, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest and willing to change." For a long time, no one spoke. Not because they didn't have words, but because they finally understood the cost of their silence. And in that silence, a new foundation was being laid, brick by uncomfortable brick. Marcus looked around the room once more, his voice gentle now, but no less commanding. "This dealership won't change because I fired someone. It will change because we finally faced what's broken and chose to rebuild it, together." The old Sterling Motors had ended the moment Marcus walked through those doors. What came next was no longer about cars. It was about character. And it was only just beginning. The silence that hovered in the room now wasn't the heavy fog of shame, it was the charged air before a downpour, the kind where hearts begin to stir beneath the weight of what they've heard, and words start clawing their way up from the depths of regret. Marcus had said what needed to be said, but he wasn't looking for submission. He was waiting for someone, anyone, to prove that this wasn't just guilt, but awakening. It was Chloe, surprisingly, who broke first. The blonde receptionist who had once whispered behind her hand and smirked at his sneakers now stared at Marcus with teary eyes. Her voice trembled unsteady, as though the realization had reached a part of her she'd long ignored. I want to apologize," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not because you're the owner, but because I went along with something ugly without even thinking twice. I judged you the moment I saw you. I laughed when you walked in, and now I feel sick about it." She looked down, her hands wringing each other as if she could twist the guilt out of her fingertips. "I want to do better," she said. "I have to." Next came Brandon. The once arrogant sales rep leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice rough with tension. "I was raised to believe I treat everyone the same," he muttered. "But that's not what I did today. I saw your shoes, your shirt. I thought I had you pegged, and I'm ashamed of that. I thought I was being funny, but I wasn't. I was being small." His fists clenched, and for once no one saw him as the untouchable sales leader, just another man confronting the shadow he'd cast. "Whatever training you want us to do," he added, "I'll be there. I need to face this head on." Tyler followed. He had said less than anyone throughout the day, but his silence, it turned out, hadn't been innocent. I didn't speak up, he admitted. I heard what they were saying. I felt it wasn't right. But I just stayed quiet. I thought, maybe it wasn't my place. But now I see that silence is a choice. And mine hurt you too. Susan hadn't moved. Her clipboard was no longer a shield, but a silent witness to everything unraveling. Her fingers trembled. Her shoulders, always so straight and set, now curled inward slightly as if trying to shield herself from the very words that moments ago she had wielded with such confidence. Finally, her voice cracked the air. It wasn't the voice of a manager. It was the voice of a woman unraveling. I built my career on control, she said almost too softly to hear. On protocols, standards, knowing what to expect. She looked up at Marcus, eyes wet, but no longer avoiding his. But today, I acted like someone I don't even recognize. I used those standards to exclude you, and the worst part, I thought I was protecting the dealership, when I was actually poisoning it. Her lips quivered, but she forced herself to go on. I let my assumptions lead every decision I made the moment you stepped in. I ignored your tone, your posture, your presence. I just saw what I wanted to see. Something beneath me. Something to dismiss. She inhaled shaky. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. And I don't expect you to forgive me because you're kind. I just hope I get the chance to unlearn what I've become. The entire room was still. No one dared to interrupt. Marcus looked at her, and there was no triumph in his gaze. Only weight. Compassion wrapped in steel. Susan, he said gently, what you did hurt. Not just me, but the culture we claim to uphold here. But I also know this change doesn't begin with pretending it didn't happen. It begins with facing it, owning it, and choosing to walk a different path every day forward. She nodded, tears now trailing freely. Then, that's what I'll do, she said. Every day, I'll prove I can be better. Marcus looked around the room. Something had shifted. There was no applause, no grandstanding, just people, exposed, honest, human. I don't expect perfection from anyone in this room, Marcus said, standing now, his voice rising slightly with clarity and conviction. But what I do expect, what this company demands from this moment forward, is truth, respect, and the courage to see a person before you see their appearance. He turned his gaze across every employee in the room. Starting today, Sterling Motors isn't just a place that sells high-end vehicles. It's a place that honors every soul who walks through those doors. And that begins with you. The room was silent, but no longer out of shame. It was the kind of silence born when something sacred has just been said, when masks have finally fallen, when rebuilding, real painful transformative rebuilding has just begun. And at the heart of it stood a man in a gray t-shirt and worn sneakers who came not to fire, but to awaken. The meeting had ended. But the silence that followed didn't disperse with the closing of the conference room door. It followed them out like a shadow, stretching across the polished tile floor of the Sterling Motors showroom, echoing in the clack of hesitant footsteps and the slow shuffle of unease. The room where they once greeted clients with forced confidence now felt foreign. The showroom hadn't changed, but they had. The glass walls, the chrome sedans, the perfectly aligned lighting, they all remained flawless. Yet now, they reflected more than luxury. They mirrored faces humbled by truth. Marcus didn't rush out of the room. He stayed seated for a moment longer than the others, watching how they exited, not with entitlement, but with something almost resembling reverence. Alex remained beside him, a quiet pillar of support, his arms crossed as he observed the transformation, not in words, but in posture. Gone were the sneers, gone were the folded arms and the easy laughter. In their place, downcast eyes, subtle nods of acknowledgement, and breaths held tight between ribs still processing shame and possibility. When Marcus finally rose, he walked toward the glass with a calm, deliberate pace. Each step seemed to reclaim the floor that had once tried to push him out. He paused near the reception desk, the same one where Chloe had laughed earlier. Now she stood up straighter than she ever had, her voice quiet but genuine. "Can I get you anything, Mr. Morgan?" She asked, no sarcasm. No theater, just a question from someone finally aware that power doesn't always arrive dressed in designer labels. Marcus gave her a small, approving nod. "A glass of water would be great," he replied. Chloe hurried off, not from fear, but from urgency to do something right. Brandon approached slowly, shoulders stiff, but his voice sincere. "Mr. Morgan. He began, his tone stripped of all bravado. I want to thank you for not walking out when any normal person would have. If it had been me, I probably would have left. Marcus met his gaze. That's exactly why I stayed. Brandon nodded, eyes misting. I don't know if I deserve to stay, but I'm not going to run from it. Good, Marcus said simply. Running never taught anyone anything. Just then Susan Miller emerged from the hallway, like someone stepping back into a world she no longer owned. Her hair was no longer immaculately styled, strands had fallen from her bun. Her blazer looked too heavy now, but her eyes, those sharp, commanding eyes, had softened. She didn't speak at first. She stood at the edge of the room, watching Marcus walk through the very showroom she'd once guarded like a fortress. And for the first time in her career, she didn't feel threatened. She felt accountable. She stepped forward, her heels clicking more softly now. Mr. Morgan. She began, pausing to gather breath. You told us in that room that we don't need to be perfect but honest. Marcus turned to face her fully. Yes. Then I'll be honest, she said, voice stronger now, steadier. Today broke something in me, something I thought was strength, but really was blindness. I thought being a gatekeeper meant protecting the brand, but I was never protecting anything. I was just deciding who was allowed to matter. Her voice caught again, but she continued. I don't want to be that kind of gatekeeper anymore. Marcus didn't offer praise. Instead, he extended a question that struck deeper. So, what kind do you want to be? Susan blinked. No clipboard, no script, only truth. One who holds the door open, not shuts it. Marcus's expression softened. He nodded slowly. Then start there. In that moment, the power she had once gripped so tightly didn't matter. What mattered was that she'd finally let go, and in doing so, had made space for something better. Around them, employees began returning to their workstations, but everything was different now. The tension had not disappeared, but transformed. It was no longer born of fear, it was born of awareness. A tension that signaled change had arrived, and it was watching. At the corner of the room, Tyler quietly placed a fresh set of brochures on the main table. But this time, he did so without trying to predict which customer might look like they could afford one. He simply placed them there. For anyone. For everyone. Chloe returned with Marcus's water. She handed it to him, with 2 hands and a bowed head. Thank you, he said. And Chloe. She looked up. Don't just serve with hands, serve with eyes open. She nodded quickly. I will. The new culture of Sterling Motors wasn't built with meetings or mission statements. It was being rebuilt in every nod, every recalibrated action, every quiet vow spoken in a silent heart. Marcus turned to Alex, who had watched the entire interaction with admiration. We've got a long road ahead, Marcus said. Alex nodded. But today you cracked the pavement. No, Marcus corrected. They did. And with that, Marcus took one final walk down the center of the showroom. This time no one whispered, no one smirked. They watched him not just as a CEO, but as a mirror, a lesson, and a man who had walked through fire, not to punish, but to change the temperature of the room forever. As Marcus stepped beyond the glass wall and stood beneath the late Arizona sun, the world outside seemed to have shifted. Not because the air had changed, but because he had just shifted the air inside Sterling Motors forever. He didn't walk away with vindication in his stride or vengeance in his chest. He walked with the gravity of someone who had stared down a culture's rotten foundation and chosen not to destroy it, but to rebuild it brick by painful brick. Behind him, the automatic doors glided shut with a soft hum, but the silence they sealed in wasn't the same one he had met upon arrival. It was heavier, wiser, pregnant with a dozen realizations now rooted in those who had once laughed, dismissed, and categorized. He paused just outside, letting the desert breeze press against his skin. This dealership had once been a symbol of exclusion, hiding behind polish and polishers. But today it had been exposed not by spectacle, but by a man in a tattered t-shirt and sneakers who refused to raise his voice because the truth was loud enough. Inside, the staff hadn't yet resumed their old rhythms. Susan stood by the main desk, one hand on the counter, as though steadying herself after a long internal storm. The name Miller embroidered on her manager badge no longer felt like armor. It felt like a challenge. She didn't bark orders. She didn't glare. Instead, she simply observed Chloe wiping down the reception counter, not out of obligation, but with care, her brows furrowed in deep thought. Tyler engaging a customer without scanning their shoes, or guessing their credit score. Brandon walking slowly between cars, his typical swagger gone, replaced by something quieter, maybe guilt, maybe resolve. No one had been fired, but it felt as though everyone had been stripped and redressed with invisible uniforms stitched from humility. There was no checklist for what to do next, only an awareness that how they did it now mattered more than ever. And though the air conditioning still blew cool and the cars still sparkled, the space felt rawer now, like the thin skin after a bandage has been pulled off. They weren't just employees anymore. They were witnesses. And every new customer who walked through those glass doors from that day forward would be silently evaluated, not just as clients, but as tests. Back outside, Marcus reached for his keys. The same worn SUV awaited him at the edge of the lot, the same one they'd all mocked hours earlier. But now, it sat like a sentinel, a symbol of everything they never expected. He opened the driver's side door, slid in, and sat for a long moment without turning the engine on. His reflection in the rearview mirror didn't smile, but it didn't frown either. It simply looked back, calm, composed, tired, but proud. The work was far from done. Changing a building's culture couldn't be finished in a single afternoon, no matter how explosive the revelation. What Marcus had done was far more important than making a point. He had planted discomfort, and discomfort left unignored had the power to transform. Not through corporate memos, but through the small choices each employee would now be forced to make, whether to greet with sincerity, whether to question their impulses, whether to see every person as a human first, not a category. He started the engine. The SUV groaned as usual, faithful and unimpressive. But Marcus no longer needed to make a statement. His presence had already carved a scar deep into the foundation of the showroom, one they would never forget. Just as he was about to drive off, a familiar click of heels sounded. Susan. She stepped into the sunlight, squinting, holding something in her hand. It wasn't a contract. It wasn't an apology letter. It was her name badge. She walked slowly toward the SUV, her expression stripped of defense. Marcus rolled the window down halfway. "I thought you were done," he said softly. Susan hesitated, then extended the badge toward him, not with defiance, but with vulnerability. "I'd like to earn this back," she said, "not keep it. Earn it. Under your standards, not mine." Marcus looked at the badge, then at the woman who hours ago had treated him as though he were unworthy to breathe near luxury. Now her hand trembled not from fear of punishment, but from hope. He didn't take the badge. He nodded toward her chest. "Pin it back on," he said. "But from now on, wear it like it weighs something." Susan's throat tightened. Slowly, deliberately, she pinned the name tag back above her heart. "I will," she whispered. He rolled the window up, shifted the gear, and pulled out of the lot. As the SUV merged onto the road, the gleaming letters of Sterling Motors reflected off the rear window, shimmering in the fading sunlight, like a mirror that had finally been wiped clean. And for the first time in years, it no longer felt like a gate. It felt like a door, one that from this day forward would remain open. 2 days later, the morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sterling Motors, casting golden lines across the pristine showroom floor. The cars looked the same, elegant, perfect, untouchable, but something invisible had shifted. It wasn't the lighting, nor the lineup of luxury vehicles. It was the energy. The way people moved, the way they looked at each other, the way they listened. Every employee now carried the silent weight of Marcus Morgan's visit, a memory that played on repeat in their minds, not because of what he wore or what he owned, but because of what he exposed. He didn't call out names. He didn't scream. But he held up a mirror that didn't lie, and in it they saw themselves clearly sometimes for the first time. Chloe sat at her desk, shoulders straighter, smile softer, not forced, not artificial. A woman in her 50s approached the desk hesitantly, her purse worn at the straps. Her shoes scuffed, her eyes scanning the glossy cars like they were distant stars. In the past, Chloe might have leaned back, sized her up, assumed, but not today. Today she stood up. "Welcome to Sterling Motors," she said with warmth. "Would you like a tour of our models? Take your time. You're our guest." The woman blinked surprised, then smiled. "Yes, thank you. I wasn't sure I'd be taken seriously." "You are," Chloe replied. "You absolutely are." Behind her, Brandon watched the exchange. He no longer strutted across the floor like he owned it. Now he walked like he was earning the right to be there. Moments later, a young couple stepped in, black mid-20s dressed casually, with visible nervousness in their eyes. Brandon had seen that nervousness before, in Marcus, in himself now. He walked toward them without hesitation. "Hey there," he greeted, extending his hand. "My name's Brandon, looking for something sporty, or something that can handle family road trips." The man laughed lightly, glancing at his wife. "We were afraid we'd get ignored again like the last place." Brandon didn't miss a beat. Not here, not anymore. From the corner office, Susan Miller stood silently watching it all unfold. She wasn't behind a closed glass door like before. She had left the door open on purpose, a symbol, no, a promise. Her blazer was still crisp, her bun still tight, but her eyes had changed. They no longer scanned people as threats or discounts. They scanned for potential, for emotion, for correction when needed. That morning, she had come in 2 hours early. She had reviewed every client interaction log from the past 3 months, not to find mistakes, but to find patterns, biases, traces of judgment buried under professionalism. She took notes, not for Marcus, not for HR, for herself. At 9:45, she called Chloe, Brandon, and Tyler into the side office. No titles, no hierarchy, just people. "I want to hear how yesterday felt," she said. "For you, for the customers, for this place." Tyler, always the quiet one, spoke first. "Different," he said, "like the air's clearer, but heavier, because now there are no excuses." Chloe nodded, eyes distant. "It's like, I finally understand what it means to see someone. I thought I was being polite before, but I was just trained. Now I actually care." Brandon exhaled slowly. "I still feel like I'm catching up with myself. Like who I was and who I want to be are two different people." Susan listened, didn't interrupt. When they finished, she folded her hands, voice steady. "Good. That means we're growing, and growth is messy, but it's real." They looked at her differently now, not as the iron-willed manager, but as someone willing to be broken and rebuilt, just like them. Then she surprised them. She pulled a slip of paper from her drawer and placed it in the center of the table. It read, "We don't sell cars. We earn trust." Handwritten, underlined. "That's our new internal motto," she said. "Every week we'll start with it. Every meeting, every decision, it stays in front of us. Not for branding, for conscience." There were no cheers, no claps, just nods, deep, reflective, sincere. Across town, Marcus Morgan sat alone at a small cafe. No entourage, no bodyguards, just a laptop, black coffee, and his quiet thoughts. On the screen was an internal report from Alex's staff engagement at Sterling Scottsdale, up 47% in 2 days. No resignations, high compliance with new cultural directives. Susan Miller personally leading daily morning check-ins. Resistance zero. Marcus smiled faintly. Not a grin of conquest, a nod to something deeper. Transformation. He didn't reply to Alex's message. He didn't need to. Instead, he opened a new file titled Sterling Framework Leadership Training, Phase 2. Because if one location could change from within, maybe others could too. Not just by policy, but by eyes finally learning how to see. A week later, Marcus returned, not with cameras, not with reporters, but alone, wearing the same understated clothes as before. Gray polo shirt, dark jeans, clean sneakers this time, not because he wanted to look different, but because he knew they would notice. And they did. As he walked through the sliding glass doors of Sterling Motors, Scottsdale, the atmosphere felt entirely new. It wasn't quieter, it was attentive, like a room that had learned how to breathe again. It wasn't about the volume, it was about the awareness. And awareness, Marcus knew, was the first true symptom of change. Chloe saw him first. She stood up instinctively, posture proud, but not rigid, like someone who had learned to stand in her identity rather than behind it. She didn't rush over. She didn't panic. She walked to him with confidence and sincerity. "Welcome back, Mr. Morgan," she said warmly. "It's really good to see you again." Marcus smiled and tilted his head slightly. "How's the water?" he asked, an echo of her joke from that first day. She flushed but laughed gently. "It's filtered now, like our mindset." Behind her, Brandon was showing a family a high-end electric SUV. His gestures were animated, but there was no showmanship, just honesty. He didn't glance at Marcus for validation. He was working, genuinely. That, to Marcus, was more valuable than any acknowledgement. Susan emerged from her office, no clipboard this time, just a small notebook and a pen. She approached with eyes clear, her movements sure, no nerves, no theater, just accountability. "Would you like to sit in on our morning alignment?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "Lead the way." The morning alignment used to be 5 minutes of corporate jargon and quotas. Today it was different. Marcus entered the training room and found the team already seated in a loose semicircle. Coffee cups, notepads, open expressions, no chairs arranged by rank. Susan stood at the front but not above. She waited for Marcus to sit, not as a guest, but as a part of the circle. When he did, she took a deep breath and began. "Team," she said, "today we're doing something simple. I want each of us to share one moment this past week when we caught ourselves thinking the old way and how we corrected it." There were murmurs, nods, then slowly Tyler raised his hand. "I had a client come in, young, looked like he walked off a skate park," he said. Old me would have assumed he was wasting time, but instead I asked him about his goals, what kind of car fit his lifestyle. Turns out he just sold his startup, bought the top-tier Genesis EV on the spot. I didn't even try to sell him. He sold himself just by being seen. A beat of silence, then soft smiles. Chloe went next. "A woman came in yesterday, didn't speak much English. I used to get nervous in those moments, afraid I'd fumble. But I used a translation app, took my time. We laughed through the mistakes. Her husband came in today to thank me in person." Brandon looked down for a moment, then spoke. "I had this reflex, this old habit of scanning shoes before I talked to someone. I didn't realize how deep it went, but yesterday I caught myself doing it. I literally stopped, looked up, told myself, meet their eyes, not their outfit. And I did." The customer smiled. It felt right. The room was quiet again. But it wasn't shameful. It was reverent. Marcus was moved not by their words, but by their ownership. These weren't just apologies. They were adjustments. "That's harder. That's rarer. That's real." Susan spoke last. "I've been journaling every night since that day," she said, eyes slightly glossy, not just to track mistakes, but to reflect. "I realized I've been a gatekeeper for so long, I forgot how to be a greeter. So now I stand in the lobby every morning for at least 15 minutes. No clipboard, no distance, just presence." She turned to Marcus. "You didn't demand it, but you modeled it, and it stuck." Marcus looked around the room. The people who once watched him with suspicion now watched him with respect, not because of his power, but because of what he had done with it. Not because of his money, but because of how he used his silence to teach louder than lectures ever could. He stood slowly and walked to the center of the circle. "I didn't come back to check up," he said. "I came back to witness." Everyone watched him still. "I'm not here to congratulate you for being decent. I'm here to thank you for choosing the hard route, the route of unlearning, of confronting yourself, of showing up every day, knowing you might mess up again, but doing it anyway." He paused, then continued. "This dealership doesn't need to be the most luxurious in Arizona. It needs to be the most human. And from what I've seen, we're finally on that road." The staff erupted not in applause, but in stillness, in agreement, in something earned. That afternoon, Marcus didn't stay for meetings. He walked the showroom, greeted 2 new clients, one in a hoodie, one in a hijab, and watched as his team welcomed them with ease, with grace, with joy. And as he left, Susan walked beside him to the door, not as an escort, as a peer. "Thank you," she said softly. Marcus turned to her and smiled. "Don't thank me," he said. "You did the hard part. You let yourself be changed." As he stepped outside and the doors slid shut behind him once more, the golden sunlight hit the dealership's polished logo. This time, it didn't shimmer with pretense, it shimmered with possibility. And for the first time, Marcus Morgan allowed himself a full, quiet smile. Not because he had won, but because they had started. It was the 3rd Friday since the reckoning, and for the first time in over a year, Sterling Motors Scottsdale had broken its own record in customer retention, not because of new promotions or glossy ads, but because people felt something different when they walked through the doors. Word had spread. It wasn't viral. It was quiet, but intentional. A whisper passed between clients. "There's a dealership in Scottsdale where they treat you like family before they know your finances." Marcus Morgan read that line in a handwritten thank you note that had been slid into the dealership's overnight mail slot, written by an elderly black veteran who had walked in out of curiosity and walked out with a lease and tears in his eyes. But Marcus didn't post it on social media. He didn't add it to a corporate newsletter. Instead, he folded it carefully and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket like something sacred. Because to him, that note meant more than revenue. It meant redemption. That morning, he didn't enter through the front doors. He came through the service bay where the mechanics worked in oil-stained uniforms rarely spoken to by customers or executives. He moved through the space like he belonged, and the team now familiar with him didn't flinch when they saw him. One of the junior techs, a Latino man named Diego, looked up and grinned. "Morning, boss. You slumming with us today?" Marcus laughed. "Only if you show me where the coffee is." That was the difference now. Jokes weren't defenses, they were bridges. 15 minutes later, Marcus stood in the middle of the staff break room, coffee in hand, surrounded not by suits, but by people, real people. He didn't give a speech. He asked questions. What's something you wish we did better? Where do you feel unseen? What would respect look like in your job? Not just in theory, but today. The answers came slow at first, but then freely, like water breaking through a loosened dam. One tech said he wished customers wouldn't assume he couldn't speak English. Another said he wanted to be introduced to clients as part of the delivery process. We fix what they drive. They should know our names too. Marcus nodded at every answer, writing nothing down, but remembering everything. Upstairs, Susan was in her office, not hiding, but preparing. She was drafting a proposal, not one about sales strategy, one about equity. A new mentorship track for entry-level employees who showed leadership potential, regardless of background or education. She had written Marcus's name at the top, with a note, "Let's build from the bottom, not just the top." As Marcus re-entered the main showroom, a woman and her teenage son stepped through the doors. She wore a plain blouse and jeans. He wore an old hoodie and clutched a skateboard. Chloe stepped forward, greeted them without glancing at their shoes. Brandon came over with a tablet asking, not what car are you looking for, but what do you need your car to do for you? Marcus stood in the far corner and watched, and that's when it happened. The boy, probably 15, looked around the dealership, then leaned toward his mother and whispered not quietly enough, "Mom, I think he's the owner." She smiled, politely skeptical. "No, baby. Owners don't dress like that." Marcus caught it. He heard it clearly, and he smiled, not out of bitterness, but because it reminded him why this work was never done, because perception still followed presentation, and until that changed everywhere, his mission wasn't over. Later that evening, after hours, the staff gathered for a voluntary debrief. They brought food homemade. Tyler brought lumpia. Chloe made banana bread. Brandon grilled sliders in the back parking lot. Someone brought a Bluetooth speaker and played old school soul. There was no agenda, no PowerPoint, just stories, laughter, shared failures, shared wins. Marcus stood among them, a red plastic cup in hand, wearing a t-shirt that said simply, "People First." Susan clinked her cup to his without a word. He raised an eyebrow. "What's that for?" She shrugged. "For not firing me when you had every reason to." He looked at her, not stern, not soft, just honest. "You fired your own excuses," he said. "I just gave you the moment to do it." She exhaled, smiled, and nodded. "Well, I still owe you one." "No," he replied. "You owe it to the next person who walks through those doors looking like I did, or worse. Give them what you denied me, that day dignity without a dress code." She blinked her throat tight and simply replied, "I will." That night, as the team lingered long after dark, the lot lit only by a few overhead lights and laughter echoing in the air, Marcus looked around and realized something profound. He hadn't just transformed a business, he had transformed the people inside it, not by leading from above, but by walking straight through their expectations with humility, holding up a mirror and refusing to let them look away. Not until they saw who they really were, and who they still could be. The next morning, before the doors of Sterling Motors even opened, Marcus arrived with something tucked under his arm, a worn leather-bound journal. It wasn't filled with financial plans or dealership forecasts. It was filled with reflections written over the years in conference hotels, airport lounges, quiet Sunday mornings alone in his kitchen. Pages full of what no MBA had taught him, what it felt like to be invisible in a room full of polished smiles. Today he was bringing that journal to a staff meeting, not to read from it, but to begin a new chapter inside it with them. By 8:15 a.m., the team was already assembled, not because they had to be, because they wanted to be. Susan stood at the whiteboard with a marker. Tyler prepped the coffee. Chloe handed out sticky notes with questions printed on them. When have you felt underestimated? What did someone do to make you feel like you mattered? What did you do to help someone feel seen? The room didn't feel like a dealership. It felt like a living organism, breathing, listening, growing. Marcus took a seat not at the head of the table, but in the circle journal in lap. Susan opened. "Today's not about training," she said. "Today's about unlearning." She stepped back. "Marcus, would you lead?" He looked around, then slowly stood, holding the journal without opening it. "I've been carrying this for years," he said, voice steady, because I didn't always have the courage to say what was inside out loud. But now I do. And more importantly, so do you. He gestured to the sticky notes. "Take 10 minutes. Answer one. Not for me, not for the board. For you." Silence followed, but it wasn't blank. It was deep. Staff scribbled. Some stared out the window, gathering memories they'd buried. Others didn't write, they just sat with it. 10 minutes passed, then Marcus said softly, "Let's share." Brandon spoke first. "I felt underestimated every time someone asked to speak to the real sales manager. I used to laugh it off, but it ate at me." Chloe followed. "One time a customer noticed I looked exhausted and brought me coffee the next day. That little gesture made me feel seen." Tyler added, "I was bullied for my stutter in high school. When a teacher slowed down and looked me in the eye just once, it changed everything." Even Diego, the shy mechanic from the service bay, raised his hand. "I never thought I belonged in meetings like this," he said. "But last week Marcus asked me what I thought we could improve. That was the first time anyone in a suit asked my opinion. Ever." One by one, voices filled the room, not with noise, but with truth. Marcus waited until everyone had spoken. Then he opened his journal, not to read, but to write. Slowly, deliberately, he penned the date at the top of a new page. Underneath it, he wrote, "Today, we began telling the truth out loud." Then he looked up. "This is what real culture is," he said. "Not policies, not scripts, moments, people, courage." He paused. "And from today on, this journal isn't just mine, it's ours." He handed it to Susan. She held it like something fragile, sacred. Each week he continued, "Someone new will write in it, not to impress, but to document the growth we promised each other." No one questioned it. They felt it. That journal, worn, leathered, silent for years, was no longer a collection of private thoughts. It had become the record of a revolution, quiet and slow, but unstoppable. Later that day, a new hire walked into the showroom. A young black woman with braids, carrying a resume and a heart full of hope. She looked around uncertain, as if trying to read the room for code's hidden rules about who was welcome. Susan was the first to see her. She didn't ask what role she was applying for. She smiled. "You're exactly where you need to be." The woman blinked, surprised. "But you don't even know me." "Not yet," Susan replied, stepping aside. "But I'd like to." That night, Marcus returned home and sat alone under dim kitchen lights. He didn't open his laptop. He didn't check sales. He simply stared at his empty journal pocket, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like the man who had to carry the weight of injustice alone. Now the weight was shared, and when weight is shared, change becomes possible, real, durable, human. He closed his eyes and whispered to no one but himself. Not just a dealership anymore. Then he smiled. A blueprint. The following week, the journal had already passed through 3 pairs of hands. Each entry was different. Chloe's pages were filled with flowing emotional reflections. "I used to think warmth was weakness. Now, I know it's a superpower." Tyler wrote a single sentence. "For the first time, I don't feel replaceable." Even Brandon, whose once slick confidence had masked deeper insecurities, had scribbled half a page that ended with, "I used to fear being average. Now, I fear being unkind." But the entry that stirred everyone was Susan's. Tucked beneath the week's notes was a short paragraph that read like both confession and commitment. "I was a mirror of every rule I never questioned. From now on, I choose to reflect something else. Openness and the grace to start over." She hadn't signed it manager. She'd signed it Susan, still learning. That small detail didn't go unnoticed. On Thursday morning, Marcus returned again, but not to observe. This time he had called a meeting not mandatory, not scheduled in HR calendars, not linked to quarterly reviews. Just an invitation titled Design Session, Building What's Next. Everyone showed up. Even Diego from the service bay, even Lily from accounting, even Samir the night janitor, because now everyone believed they were part of the foundation. The group gathered in the largest open space of the dealership. The cars rolled back slightly to make room for chairs, flip charts, and a whiteboard that read, If we were building Sterling Motors from scratch today, what would we keep? What would we leave behind? Marcus stood at the center marker in hand. Today, he said, we don't talk about sales targets. We talk about the soul of this place, what it is, what it's becoming, what we want others to feel the moment they walk in. Susan was the first to speak. I'd remove the unspoken dress code, she said. Not the uniforms, the judgment about how clients dress. That needs to go. Diego raised his hand. I'd like service customers to get thank you calls, not just surveys. Real voices. Real gratitude. Chloe added, let's remove the front desk barrier. I want to stand with people, not behind a counter. Tyler suggested a new layout move, premium cars closer to the entrance, but leave space between them. Not to create distance, he said, but to invite people in, not intimidate them. Brandon raised an unexpected point. What if we created a customer story wall, photos of real clients, no filters, no glam, just people from every walk of life who found a home here? Heads nodded. Susan added, and make sure those stories aren't just the high-ticket ones. Highlight the first-time buyer, the immigrant family, the woman who bought her car after escaping abuse. Those are the stories that matter. Marcus didn't speak. He wrote, word after word, sentence after sentence covering the whiteboard with the living blueprint of a company that was finally learning to feel before it tried to impress. After 2 hours, the board was full. No one had looked at their watches. No one had checked their phones. Because this was what they'd always craved, not just a job, but a place to be part of something honest. Marcus stood back, handed the marker to Susan. This is yours now, he said. Not just yours, he looked around everyone's. That afternoon, the dealership didn't just function, it flowed. Clients walked in and felt something they couldn't name, a hum of warmth, of curiosity, of dignity. A black father with 2 kids was greeted by name by Brandon, who knelt to fist bump the younger son. A teenage girl buying her first used car was offered a simple congratulations note, handwritten by Chloe. Susan personally offered bottled water to a disabled veteran who entered with a walker, then walked him out to his car without once glancing at the time. By closing hour, no one rushed to leave. They lingered not out of duty, but because when you build something real, it's hard to walk away from it, even for the night. Marcus stayed behind, walking the showroom in silence. He paused beside the journal, resting on the corner table near reception. Without hesitation, he picked it up, turned to the last page, and wrote, Sterling Motors is no longer a dealership. It's a promise. A promise that no human being will be measured by fabric or first impressions. A promise that we will meet each person with the eyes of someone who remembers what it feels like to be overlooked. A promise that we will never stop redesigning the walls around our hearts. He placed the journal back down. Susan approached, no clipboard, just a quiet look of understanding. This still feels unreal, she said softly. Marcus looked at her. That's because it's real for the first time. Then he turned toward the glass doors. The setting sun poured amber light across the tiles. No longer cold, no longer slick. Now they shimmered like the foundation of something far more valuable than chrome or commission. A legacy. One rainy Saturday afternoon, the final test came, not in a storm of confrontation, but in the quiet entrance of a man no one had expected. The glass doors slid open, and in stepped an elderly black man, rainwater dripping from the edges of his threadbare beanie, a faded flannel shirt clinging to his shoulders, and an old canvas bag slung low over one side. His jeans were damp and torn at the knee, and mud clung stubbornly to the soles of his boots. Every eye in the showroom turned just for a moment, but this time something happened that would have never occurred a month ago. No one looked away in dismissal. No one reached for a security phone, and no one whispered. Instead, Chloe stepped forward with a towel. Sir, she said gently, come on in out of the cold. Let me grab you something warm. The man blinked in surprise, lips parting, as though unsure whether he had walked into the wrong place. I just wanted to take a look, he mumbled, voice hoarse. I know I probably can't. Brandon stepped in before he could finish. You don't have to buy a thing, he said with a warm grin. But I think you'll like what you see. Tyler brought over a chair. Diego from the service bay walked out to offer coffee. Susan came forward and introduced herself without hesitation, shaking the man's hand with both of hers. And in the far corner, Marcus Morgan watched, not intervening, not directing, just witnessing. The man sat down, sipping the coffee, eyes wandering around the luxury vehicles as if he were in a museum. Then slowly he reached into his bag and pulled out a crumpled manila envelope. I used to work here, he said quietly. Long before all this shine. Back when we had metal desks and no air conditioning, I helped build the first service garage. The room fell still. Chloe's eyes widened. Tyler leaned in. We had no idea, he said. They never told us. The man nodded. I left when things changed. Wasn't much room for someone like me once the money rolled in. His voice trembled, not bitter, just tired. But I came back today to see if maybe, just maybe, it felt different. Marcus stepped forward at last. His presence was calm but firm, his footsteps the same steady rhythm that had reshaped this place from the ground up. He didn't speak right away. He sat beside the man, looked him in the eyes, and said, "Only this. It's different now because people like you built the floor we all walk on, and we finally remember that." The man smiled small, unsure, but real, and in that moment, the showroom, the team, the story, it all came full circle. Sterling Motors had once been a place of exclusion, dressed as luxury. Now it was a place of restoration, cloaked in humility. Not perfect, not finished, but reborn. That night, as the last lights dimmed and the doors locked, the team gathered one final time for reflection. Marcus stood with the journal in his hands. He didn't read from it. He added one sentence: "Change doesn't live in policies. It lives in moments when you choose to see someone you were taught to overlook." He handed the journal to Susan, not as a test, but as a torch. Then he stepped outside into the night air, no spotlight, no applause. Just the sound of a quiet engine starting and a legacy left behind not in profit margins or press releases, but in every handshake, every eye contact, every door that now stayed open. Sterling Motors wasn't just a dealership anymore. It was a living promise. And from that day forward, every person who crossed its threshold, rich or poor, polished or plain, would find not just cars, but something far rarer, a place where human dignity came first. He didn't fire them to make a statement. He gave them a second chance to rebuild, to relearn, to rise. And they took it. What started as humiliation turned into transformation. A showroom once ruled by silence and judgment is now a place where every person, no matter what they wear or where they come from, is seen, heard, and welcomed. Marcus Morgan didn't just change a company, he sparked a cultural shift. And now the question isn't what he did. It's what we will do when it's our turn to choose between bias and dignity. If this story moved you, comment and share it with someone who needs to remember, real leadership starts not at the top, but at eye level.